All
evening.
right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to a soul session through Creative Life Spiritual Center presented by our Be the Change initiative. This is the latest in a series of these discussions, and if you would like to see past ones, and they're all great. What you need to do is go to YouTube, enter Creative Life Spiritual Center, click on that, click on playlists, and then scroll down to Soul Sessions and click there. And you'll see we have going back to 2017, I think we have a video of these various discussions. Tonight, we have a very special guest and a great friend of our center. She is the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Lindenmeyer, and she's joined by Reverend Katie Rox Brigatti, who is, as most of you know, a staff minister at Creative Life. And we're being assisted behind the scenes by Reverend Lisa Ryan, Danielle Markadell, and others on the Be the Change team, Reverend David Dewhurst, who has been working on tech for this. And Reverend Katie and Reverend Dr. Cynthia I don't think, mind if I call them Katie and Cynthia instead of by the formal title all through the evening.
Please.
Okay, good. All right, we take that off the table. I'm Jesse Jennings from Creative Life, and Cynthia and Katie are prayer partners, and we have all been in classes together, and we have just a wonderful friendship amongst the three of us. And Cynthia is the founder of a sacred activism ministry. It's called the Sacred Activism Community, a 501c3 public charity, and she serves as chaplain and director of student wellness services for the American Public University System. Her background includes being a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1990. She's held various command and staff positions in the Army, including company commander in the Republic of Korea, minority admissions officer for West Point, and chaplain for the United States Corps of Cadets in a civilian capacity while serving as chaplain in the U.S. Army Reserves. Her life experiences from living unhoused to commanding soldiers, from residing abroad and across 15 U.S. states to serving as a chaplain at West Point and pastoring several diverse denominational churches, shape her metaphysical perspective and vision for a spiritually awakened world, and don't they? And let me add here that she is a newly ordained minister of Centers for Spiritual Living as of last week or the week before. She earned her Doctor of Ministry, DMin degree from Princeton Divinity School in 2010, her Master of Divinity, MDiv from Duke Divinity School in 2000. And those, I'm told, are two pretty good universities. She holds a professional certification in pastoral care from the Blanton Peel Institute in New York City. She enjoys teaching yoga and Zumba and is passionate about overcoming the human condition. She is married to Vince, who served 26 years in the U.S. Army, and together they have two children and two dogs. And let me tell you, folks, that's not the half of it. And you're going to hear a lot more tonight as we go through this conversation, which is about sacred activism. And I'm going to say just a few more words and then get out of the way and let the ball start rolling here. Tonight, unlike most of the past soul sessions, which have featured a speaker and they say what they have to say and we discuss it and there's some commentary and then we kind of move on to another speaker, tonight is going to launch a program, a sacred activism discussion group at Creative Life that's going to roll out on Thursday night starting August the 8th at 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m. Central Time. And we will have more detail about this, a précis on it in the Facebook comments, and certainly in the weekly emails that start coming out this Friday from the center. And if you would like to receive those, just go to creativelife.org and click the little box there to get our constant contact emails. Um, we're really excited about this, and there's so much to cover, but I hope you will join us for that ongoing series starting after just a couple of weeks break, the second Thursday in August. So, Cynthia, your sacred activism proposal was first came across my field of vision as the 8-week syllabus of things to discuss. And you have on here on week one, Introduction to Sacred Activism, exploring the essence of sacred activism and its role in addressing multifaceted challenges, diving into the mystical truth of transformation amidst chaos. Can you tell us a little bit more about just that right now?
Yeah, and thank you, Jesse, KT. I learned first the term sacred activism from Andrew Harvey reading the CSL Science of Mind magazine. So not everything, but most of my foundation of what I understand as sacred activism comes from the teachings of Andrew Harvey. And I've talked with him. He knows I started the community and all that. And he's just very excited. If you've ever talked to him, he's a very passionate person. And he has 5 principles of sacred activism that I did follow for many years. And one of them, which I love, is whatever breaks your heart is what you find passionate about. And that's kind of what guides you to be what you're going to be active in. And so asking whatever breaks your heart. And then the second step or stage is forming networks, supportive networks with others. Because if you go in as a lone ranger, you're probably going to get burned out. And the third aspect that he proposes is practicing remembrance. So really rituals, anything that helps also build the foundation into whatever you're doing. Embracing fierce feminism, because so much of our world is a patriarchal mindset. And so to not just look at it from the pretty much the popular or our taught patriarchal lens. So embracing feminism, fierce feminism, I should say, because he's very enthusiastic about that term. And then returning always to joy. And so those 5 principles, when COVID first happened, I made a video almost every week to get the community excited. And whatever was going on in the world, and as you remember during COVID, so much was going on. So I had different episodes, and I always came to those 5 principles to help guide me. And they're basically different sermonettes, anywhere from 8 to 10 minute sermonettes, because of course during COVID we weren't meeting as a community. So that's why I founded the online community to help bring people together. And now the community, I just encourage people, whatever community they're in personally, to be engaged in that. But meeting with people, there's not like a set template, like first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Because I meet with people and I ask them, what's your background? What drives you? And what's important in this work always is and Andrew Harvey talks about, but is to do shadow work, because uh, that's always going to be a facet of whatever breaks your heart or whatever you're engaged in. And one aspect, and I've learned so much by doing activism, good activism, burnout activism, reactivism, and I'm still learning. Yet I am pretty much to a point where between embracing science of mind principles and always having to practice meditation, very important, spending time in nature, that helps ground me to know that when I'm doing activism, it's out of love. It's not out of reaction, and it's not out of anger. Because when I know, when I get to that place, like if you can take any subject, I'll take something very easy. The cereal aisle at the grocery store. Okay, that's something very easy. There's something about that that just breaks my heart. I don't know why we have to have so much cereal choices. And so I asked myself, well, why does that bother me? Well, because you've got so many sugar cereals. And why does that bother me? Well, because as a mom taking my kids down that aisle, I had to like be mean because my kids wanted that. So eventually we just avoided the cereal aisle, right? But so what I would say is, okay, what breaks my heart is how much our food industry doesn't even have food, right, for people. And then that could lead into when I'm active with food pantries, ensuring that we're not giving people what's not food. We're giving them sugar. Instead of giving them sugar cereal, you give them something that's a little bit healthier. So like when I'm working with people, a lot of things just tie in together. And sometimes people do activism out of someone else's desire and not what breaks their heart. See, the passion, the is really what drives it, and that's grounded in. It's got to be grounded in love. Otherwise, it's not the sacred activism. It could be activism, but it won't be the sacred aspect. And so the balance of the sacred, the meditation, those practices with the activism is what's really important. The yin and the yang, the transfusion of both of them. And it's easy to get off balance. And I think all of us know when we get to be off balance in one way or another, and just being aligned and attuned to that. And so it's a constant, I think it's fun. It's a constant uh challenge for me. And that's why the supportive networks are always like accountable to have, like a prayer partner or a community to be involved with.
I think I just was going to point out that first of all, there is a poll on the CLC website that you can vote for the things that you might be interested in having us discuss. And I love that you started with COVID, because that is truly, I think, a time of absolute change for our world. We became a different culture. There was so much fear. There was so much, worry. And at the same time, this Zoom, Facebook, all of these other technologies came into play, allowing us to connect from many, many miles away, and maybe even find a clearer definition of our tribe. So you've got the sea turtles, and there could be people all around that just are just passionate about that, and passionate about that part of ecology. Um, so I love that you started with that, and you're right. These virtual conversations are so important.
They are. And I love how much joy you bring to this work. As you were just describing what you were, there wasn't this heavy, leaden seriousness about it. We must save the earth, and we must. And I bring that up because there's so much scolding that goes on amongst we who consider ourselves progressives about we're not doing enough or we didn't. I have done this to myself as well as have heard others do it to one another. Like you mentioned, the cereal aisle. Is there a part of you that said, I should have thought of this before? The food industry has been this way since I was a little kid. And we all come to the conversation when we come to it, right? And notice that something's been breaking our heart. It hasn't, we've been hurting all along and we didn't know what it was until we asked. And that's the shadow work you point out. So, yeah, to do it with joy is just an absolutely wonderful thing. And then answers come. We're going through this right now in my neck of the woods with the aftermath of this hurricane. Yeah, everybody's blaming the utility companies, and yet everybody has trees on their property, and the trees fell, and limbs came off and took down lines, which and on and on. And so, what is it really about this that's causing us pain? And it feels like it's that we're powerless, that we have no voice, that so many of us uh, don't. There are monopolies and there are corporate structures and things like this that we just can't get their attention. What we need.
Yeah, it's interesting. So being a chaplain of it's an online university, I work with students all over. And today working with a student whose car was flooded. He lives in Katy and can't his main job is an Uber driver and DoorDash, can't do that. And the insurance company, it's delayed and so can't pay the rent. And the rental agency thankfully gave them a couple weeks to get money together. However, it's just frustrating to think that the rental agency won't, like, okay, this month we'll delay it. They said if you don't have your rent by it's actually this Friday, we're gonna have to start the eviction paperwork. And I know once you're in the system for eviction, and if you do get evicted, it's almost impossible to get a rental unit in the future. And that is something, that's one of the things I am passionate about, is just our housing system, because
Absolutely.
um it's gotten so much worse, especially after COVID. And that leads to, I'm very passionate about the homeless. And I think, I can't remember who I sometimes listen to too many podcasts, but
Hmm.
listening to someone, and I think they said that they just carry $20 with them at all times, and the purpose of that $20 is for someone that they see that's homeless. Um, I can't remember where I heard that from.
Mhm.
Could have been
Mhm.
in one of your messages for all I know, Jesse.
It could have been. I mean, a lot of people do that.
Mhm.
And um and then sometimes the people who do that, who say they do that, get scolded by other people. Well, they're just going to buy drugs or the wine or this kind of thing. And it's, you know, and so, well, you can hand out bottles of water to people, and that's not, money, and it's so on and so on. And there's all of this. Well, if it's a gift, it's not your business,
Mm.
what's
And I
done
think
with it.
a
That's
homeless person, one of the things they don't have is decision and choice and power. And so you're empowering them to make that decision. If they make a decision to buy cigarettes or whatever, that's their decision. Uh, but having I homelessness is something I am passionate about, because I was homeless for it was only 3 months, but in the in the streets of Austin. And I just was so thankful for the church folks who helped us, going to the laundromat, being able to wash our clothes. And dignity is huge for homeless folks. Even if you don't give a homeless person money, if you just ask them, look them in the eye, and make that human connection, that right there is sacred activism. It doesn't have to involve a monetary exchange. It can just involve a love human exchange.
Mhm. Yeah, the heart to heart contact, because we're all in this together.
yeah.
We have worked with the Montgomery County Food. Oh, let me say this: Cynthia is from Spring, Texas. For those of you who are
Coincidence?
right, isn't that amazing? I mean, we can tell you, Spring, Texas is not the crossroads of the Western civilization. It's it's a little
Mm.
suburban kind of spot on the map outside of Houston, but she's from there. Isn't that cool?
And she lived
So,
where I lived in Monterey,
and she
California.
lived where you lived in Monterey?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I
It's a
did I know
military.
that?
No, in fact,
Yeah.
I know my aunt, she worked with, is it Northwest Assistance Ministry, 11?
Yeah, Nam, sure. Down on
My
1960.
aunt was very involved in that. And
Hmm.
one of the things I was thinking about sacred activism in high school, this is awful, but I guess it was a thing for us to go to Huntsville, to the prison, when there was an execution. And I remember, I was I was I don't know, I thought that was good to execute someone that's done something wrong. And then I met Sister Helen Prejean, who wrote the book Dead Man Walking.
Yep.
But she she changed my perspective on that incredibly. But it's interesting, because I I remember it every time, the execution that we went to when I was in high school. I don't remember his name, but I remember it had something to do with pixie sticks, and he had poisoned his son with a pixie stick on trick or treat. Because I remember at the execution, we were all, I think he was called the trick or treat killer. But anytime I see like the pixie sticks, I remember that. But that's sacred activism is also transformation, because I was transformed from having one stance to this other stance. And I understand people that are for um, capital punishment, because I was once there. And so I don't judge them. That's another thing I think that's important about activism. It's not judging the other person, just listening to where they're coming from. And a lot of times it's fear. And one of the aspects too is I ask myself, am I doing whatever the activism out of fear? And I know that if that's the answer, I'm like, oh, I've got to go back to the inward, the sacred, and get grounded in the love as well. But yes, I know Spring, Texas well.
It's funny.
That's awesome. I don't know. It's just awesome.
It is.
So the metaphysical model
Mhm.
of putting the positive opposite in your heart of the condition that you're seeking to change does not in any way rule out physical action, uh, moral outrage, um, and direct engagement in changing that situation. And so many have thought it did. So many
Oh,
have thought we don't go there as a group.
I think science of mind has such a powerful ability to be sacred activists because by treatment, that's huge sacred activism right there.
Exactly what I was going to say. That's the one of the things I love about this philosophy is that I am never helpless because I always have a tool that I can use. It's very different than it, well, I don't want to debate, but it's different than a prayer in that I am actively moving energy as opposed to a prayer where I'm beseeching and begging and asking, please, please, please. So it gives me a little bit more personal power, I think. Um, and that part is sacred to me. And I think
Did
also,
you?
go ahead.
Yeah. No, no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think also one of the things that, Cynthia and I have talked about was um, ways to be, you know, how how to teach folks to do activism in a different way. So when I was growing up, I grew up in California and the women's movement. My mom, I was like 8 and I was going to the protests and all that kind of stuff and throwing salami at the Miss California pageant people. And, that never sat well with me. And so I prefer my own thing is I prefer rather than demonstrating with a sign, I prefer to do the work. I prefer to get a group together and create little kits for the homeless, that kind of thing. Give them socks and underwear and tampons and things that they need, and keep 10 of those in my car. So for me, it's more about the beauty that this philosophy teaches about community and being active. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it brings to mind a project we had before COVID, and it kind of fizzled out. And maybe we'll pick it back up, but it takes a lot of work. And what they were doing was taking plastic grocery bags, which are still legal in Texas, and weaving them, twisting them into little ropey things, and then weaving them into mats, sleeping mats for the homeless or for anybody who wanted it.
Shirley showed me a picture of that last night.
Okay, yeah,
It was
yeah.
so wonderful. And I thought, God,
And they take forever to make,
what an
but
amazing,
but to
what an
get a
amazing.
group together to do this and to sing while you're doing it or story tell or something like that makes the time fly, and you produce this wonderful thing that's helpful, and it also repurposes stuff that would go into a landfill, and it's a win all the way around. Yeah, that's completely phenomenal. Um, So in looking at the world, how do we keep from getting just so burdened down by all of the different issues that seem to hover over us? I suppose kind of the mothership of all of them being the fate of the earth, the fate of the planet, that even if we work out social issues and even if everyone has a home and three squares and everything else, that the earth is on fire. How do we not collapse under the weight of that?
Yeah, I call that the squirrel. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Up, but the dog just is like squirrel, squirrel. And I've been there, especially being in ministry for so long, it's easy to just get pulled in so many paths. But that's why I like going back to Andrew Harvey's teaching, like what breaks your heart. And for me, I know that when I spend time in meditation, um, and if I'm interested and I'm called to it, and being involved in that brings me joy, It could be one or two things. And I think there's seasons for whatever sacred activism aspects they're on. Like I know in our poll, we had LGBTQ. Right now, I'm not in the season to be a sacred activist in that area. Back when I was in the military, I was very active in helping with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell
Mhm.
policy. Right now, I'm just not called for that. Right now, my biggest calling is mental health, helping people with mental health. And then I've been very called for racial justice, or um, not until really uh, probably pretty recent, like 2014, 2015. And my circle of friends, many of them, I saw their struggles. And so been involved in educating. And right now at the university, a lot of the conduct issues that we have with students, I notice it's sadly with more African American students, and often it's an issue that has formed a trigger response in the student. And so now what I'm passionate about is training staff and faculty on trauma. And so we're reading the book My Grandmother's Hands, um,
Mhm.
and I'm leading that discussion with a friend of mine who we do lots of teachings on racial issues. And Sacred Activism Community, we are helping produce a documentary. It's been an ongoing project, but it's almost ready. It takes a lot of money to produce a documentary, and it's about uh, real short. I think what it helps people do is see their own prejudices, because it's told from a son whose political ideologies and racial understanding is different from his father. And his father, while the film's being made, he finds out his dad has prostate cancer. And so now his dad's dying. They're trying to reconcile. It's very powerful. But at the same time, it happens during the time of George Floyd. And in Omaha, we had a a bar owner during some of the protests shoot an African American young man. And so we had our own little George Floyd incident in Omaha. And so, but it's, I think you could take any microcosm of the country, and the name of the film is going to be called My Omaha. And I think it's going to be very powerful, especially for white people who might feel uncomfortable talking about racial issues. We're hoping that the documentary will be able to allow people to further explore their own prejudices, but also to see the other perspective of being challenged to have friends who look different than them, or who are from different economic classes than they are. And so that those are my two passions right now that keep me from going all the other ones. That's what I'm locked into right now.
And that's such good work. It truly is. And I remember we have Tracy Brown, um, who was instrumental in bringing the awareness to so many people. I will just speak for myself as a white woman. Um, I thought I really went right into that whole, well, I'm a good white woman. I don't believe in racism, that kind of stuff. She kicked my patootie. And let me tell you, I needed it. I needed it because my privilege was out of my own reach. And that's the thing, is trying to understand that equal doesn't mean the same. And there really is no way to measure that type of thing. So I look forward to many more of those ass kicking. So I shouldn't say that online. But
Why not?
I
Why
love
not?
being called on things because I think it's important. That's how we learn. That's how we find that sacred, right? Isn't it? That's how it becomes important to us in our heart.
Yeah, and there's much to learn when anytime you're talking about racial justice, whether it be for Native American Indians, or well, any non-white majority. It's a lot to learn. It's relearning history. It's learning about stories of people that have been whitewashed. And it takes a lot of work, and sometimes people don't want to do that work, and that's fine. Um, but I think a lot of people do become passionate about learning about the stories and the people. And usually if we explore our own ancestry, we can probably find like, wow, so I wonder what it was like for my family. How were they involved? And that's one thing about the book, My Grandmother's Hands, is it talks about the passed on trauma, not just for African Americans, but also for those of us who are white who may have had slave owners in our history and or who had witnessed a beating or lynching. That trauma gets passed on. And the book has exercises that go within. So it's not just the educational piece, but I do think the book's very sacred. He wouldn't use those terms. The author wouldn't. But in turning inward is just so valuable. And it's whether you call it spirit or God, divine essence, that aspect I think is important to the activism that's involved, because I think one of the key aspects in any activism is seeing not someone as the other, but seeing them as you, as seeing them as a divine individuation or creation, or as I like the Course in Miracles, and one of the teachings I like about it is whenever you're talking to someone, they're either giving you love or they're giving you a cry for love.
Yeah.
And I remember that when I'm talking with a student who's maybe yelling at me for something, and I'm like, oh, this is a cry for love. And how can I respond to that? And I think that's important whenever you're in a situation, no matter if it's tense or maybe just the person disagrees with you.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a poet who said that what if every word of attack or something is actually a cry for love or a request for love. Yeah. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. Um, in the poll, I didn't see these words exactly in the syllabus that could be in here, but it speaks about white exceptionalism, which I've also heard described as white normalism. That
Mm.
the white culture is the benchmark by which all other cultures should be judged. White music is the great classics and white literature and Shakespeare and all of this and everything else is a derivative of that or something. And I know a reaction that a lot of white people, myself included, have had over the years has been, I didn't participate. I would never. My hands are clean. No one in my family that I'm aware of. So this doesn't apply. And shame on those to whom it does apply. And then the crashing realization that has come to us um, at different junctures along the way, those of us who've had our eyes opened, that we are complicit in this because we have benefited. We have benefited so much from the sacrifices of other people and have never acknowledged it, have never acknowledged our place in that or our perpetuation of that system. And can we talk a little bit about the intersection of white um, exceptionalism and the patriarchy and how dismantling the one pulls threads out of the other.
Mm.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes to, for me, is um, when I'm working with others, is especially white people, I ask, just write down your 10 closest friends. Just write it down and look at that list. And um, for me right now, during COVID, our bubble included, I had 5 African Americans that were in my bubble during COVID. And I think that was it. It did a lot to help me understand more. Um, and I mean, I still have quite a bit to learn, but what I love is they are so much part of our family, my family, that they they can call me out in love, or I could ask them a question. And I think this is very important. The the friend Ajamal, who I do these racial talks with, he and I just have a good friendship. So whatever comes up, I know that whatever he says to me, it's in love. And so I think looking at your friend circle is very important. We haven't really talked much about ego, but ego gets
Mm,
involved in
hmm
activism. And that's why I think doing work on the shadow side is very important. And I don't want to throw the ego under the bus, because the ego has a good, important role. However, I think anytime defensiveness comes out, that's very important. And I'm aware, just yesterday I had lunch with a friend, and she's a sex therapist, and she's getting ready to do a talk in a major conference, but they're not paying her. And I found myself wanting to go in white savior mode, like, oh, well, I need to write them so you can get paid. And as I was saying this, I'm like, I'm going to white savior mode, aren't I? And she's like, yep. And it's just, it's being kind of aware of the why behind your doing things. But
hmm
the white exceptionalism, that's one aspect of this film, My Omaha, that is talked about, because the dad comes from very poor roots. In fact, they still don't own a house. They've rented a house, all the son who made the movie. And so he saw I'm white and I'm poor, so therefore I'm just as the victim consciousness, right?
hmm
It's very prevalent in many racial conversations, and that's why I think it's important to go back to the define. And it goes back to we are consciousness, right? We are not our bodies, yet in this state that we live on Earth, especially in America, this is how we look at people. We, for some reason, we look at the way a person's dressed. We look at it, possibly their skin color, and we make all these beliefs, or we make judgments based on beliefs, and it gets all messy. And so I think it's important in doing this work, asking oneself, okay, you made that statement. Why do you make that statement? Well, because of this. And if you keep unpacking, you go back to that core beliefs. And white exceptionalism, it's almost like how dualism is just part of who we are. When we were in kindergarten, we learned, big, small, short, tall. I mean, that's just the framework we saw each other. And sadly, as Americans, we were taught race as well, which we know is a human made up construct.
hmm
But, and it's deconstructing that, and it takes a lot of work. I had to deconstruct all the theology I learned in Christianity, and that's taken some time. And as far as patriarchy goes, um, yeah, that's a huge lens, but it doesn't mean that all men are bad. Not all white people are bad. And see, there I go again, classifying something as good or bad.
Right.
Uh, and yeah, I mean, coming from the military, quite a bit of patriarchy, and that creates wounds. And then in activism, I think it's important to not react out of hurt or pain, but again, it goes back to love. And I'm talking a lot, Katie. I want to make sure you
Oh
can.
no, this is perfect. I love it. And I do, I like what you're saying about that, about that it does go back to deconstructing. I don't need to blame. I don't need to even blame my culture or Brooke Shields for making me feel like I'm an inadequate woman. Um, I can own my own stuff as I am deconstructing. And I think that's the piece that's really important. It's having a safe place and safe people, that, like you were describing, to ask that question. Am I, is this coming off a little bit like I'm trying to save all people, that type of thing. Um, and you and I were talking earlier and about perception, and you said that it was funny because she has a very different perception of Californians than I do, who was raised here by hippies in California. and and so it's there's not, we talked about where you live makes a difference. And so there aren't a lot of people, no one would be shocked about a pride parade in Santa Cruz, California. People would say, what am I going to wear? So it's like a generalization of a group of people. And I do think that in itself is something that gets stereotyped. You know, and Jesse and I've talked about this. I sometimes say, oh, Texas. Oh my gosh, I could never live in Texas, you know. And yet here I am with two incredibly aware people that are from Texas.
So
Well, and let me just jump in here and say
Yeah.
that the city of Houston has, I think, the third or fourth largest pride parade in the world,
Right.
and is one of the most. I think it's the second most, or perhaps third most ethnically diverse city in North America, with Toronto being first, and possibly New York second, something like that. So when you're talking about a Texas, or you're talking about a California, you have all these different regions and all these different, and that much of East Texas votes the same as Orange County, California.
Yes.
It's just, I wanted to say also that I was thrilled to notice in the people that you invited tonight, not only Dr. Tracy Brown and many other leaders in CSL, but that Ernest Holmes himself has a Facebook page, and it puts his location as being Santa Cruz, California. And I had no idea that's where he disappeared to.
But I would believe that.
So, like
Speaks
Elvis
of the
on
redwood
Mars in
trees,
1960, he moved to Santa Cruz and holed up, right?
where
Yeah.
everyone ends up.
Yeah. Well, this is a thing that comes up a lot with white people, as Cynthia said, both of you are saying, is it like, well, I had it hard. Nobody gave me a free, a handout. Nobody lifted me up. I had to do this work myself, and so I resist the welfare state and all of this call for equity and all. And isn't that a knee-jerk reaction based in fear of losing what we have or not getting what we need? That somehow if you raise up one group of people, another group of people is going to fall off the other end of the bench. And why would that have to be the case? Why
Well,
cannot everyone thrive? Yes,
so
go ahead.
going back to science of mind principles, realizing that spirit is the source of all resources. And it's interesting how and I don't know if it's an American capitalism thing or what, but we think someone else's gain is someone else's loss.
Yeah.
And it doesn't exist like that. But most definitely, I know when I was the outreach officer for West Point, I don't look Hispanic, but I was a minority office recruiting officer for West Point, lived in Los Angeles, and um, did it was I just came back from Phoenix yesterday and watched the movie King Richard. I hadn't seen that, and I remember the first time I went into Compton, didn't understand context, nothing. Went into a Denny's in Watts, and the waiter came up to me. He goes, "You sure you want to be here?" I'm like, "Well, no. Do you have pancakes today?" I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
have my context down, but it's interesting how much a community can really um, follow a human race consciousness or certain DNA that's there. And uh, I have a friend who is from Haiti, and I mean, he looks like he's dark skinned, and he's aware that only living here 10 years, he ingested the African American narrative because people were projecting it onto him. So in 10 years, he's like owned that. And so I think that's one thing about activism is being aware of our own narratives and experiences and what gets activated. And I guess it goes back to just, I know we preach meditation quite a bit, but it is important to know oneself. And of course, there I am quoting a Greek person, and here we are as Americans who have so much of our ethical virtue training in the Greeks, and we didn't get taught from a Middle Eastern background, or there's great philosophers, we don't even know their names because they've just been lost to history.
Well, there's a school of thought that says the Greeks copied most of their material from the Egyptians of Kemet,
Yep.
you know. Yeah. You bring up capitalism. Oh, let's talk about capitalism. That's always a nice hot button, and the book Caste, and literature along those lines. It talks about how it's so often not uh, racial or ethnic uh, disparity that is at issue as it is your place in the social pecking order financially, um, and how upward mobility is repressed and at the same time glorified as the American dream. Um, I remember the first time I taught a course for the School of Ministry, and this was in 2007, and it was a different structure to the school at that time. And we were doing the historical foundations of New Thought, such as I do now, but I had, there's a lot of material I hadn't glommed onto yet. So we're working our way through this. And one of the students asked about the concept of manifest destiny. And they said, isn't this really what, how religious science plays out is that everybody ought to be wealthy and look down on those who aren't. And they had an issue with that, and they wanted to know what to do with that for their own peace of mind and also in their future teaching work. And that led to all kinds of wonderful conversations. One last thing on that, and then I want to hear your reactions to it, and I'll be quiet. We had the then director of the Montgomery County Food Bank. We had a parade. They had a parade of different directors there for a while for some reason, and each one of them came to our center and did a Sunday service and talked about how we could work with the food bank and so on. Well, the first one, whoever came, I think it was, he said, you realize that something like, I don't know, 85, 90% of the people who get food from a food bank are not unemployed. They're the working poor. They have 2, even 3 jobs round the clock, and they still can't feed their families. And he said, if the world knew this, there'd be a whole shift in perception about, instead of these lazy, shiftless people who sit around collecting this and going from door to door, that these are the people who are picking up your garbage at the curb. These are the people who are putting the roof on your house. These are the people who are working out in the hot sun day in, day out.
Taking care of your children.
Taking care of your children.
Educating.
Yeah. Yeah. Which in Texas, you have, excuse me if I get animated about that, you have to spend something like, and I'm going to get this wrong, but you have to spend something like 4 or 5 times the number of hours in training to get a license to cut hair than you have to train to work with children.
Ouch.
Yeah,
That
that's
hurts.
just nuts.
Yeah.
That's just nuts. So anyhow, your thoughts on this about the socioeconomic disparities, the wealth divide, and how we can address this.
Yeah, I mean, so many different venues to come from it. And like I said, one of my passions is mental health. And our Western ideas of mental health are just I don't even know what they are. They're archaic. They're if they were a food, it'd be a fruit cake. I mean, I apologize to people who might like fruit cake. It just so I spend a lot of time in South America working with shamans, and I'm a big proponent advocate for plant medicine and psychedelics, yet the way the Western world is trying to approach it, it's of course people want money. And our pharmaceuticals, if people knew how much benefit that they could get from plants our pharmaceuticals would be wiped out. And we just lost a very dear friend, and he has two children left behind, 14 and 9. And I told the wife, I said, please do not let your children get put on any kind of of drugs, because I've worked with too many people who are taking Adderall or antidepressants, and it's just it's it's uh it's evil, I think, is what's happening. And that goes back to the war on drugs, Nixon, which led to so many arrests of mainly Native Americans, African Americans, and our that you could talk about the school to prison pipeline, our prison population, that economic disparity. I mean, it is such this interweb connected, and really at the center of it, I believe, is capitalism, where you talk about redlining. You can talk about people getting hired. I mean, generational wealth. I mean, I think a lot of it does go back to capitalism. And like, I could just go on forever. I know I'm aware of our time. Katie, I turn it to
Well,
you.
the one comment I was going to make is that I think that the great equalizer truly is mental health. Because mental health, I mean, there are circumstances, but understanding how the brain works, understanding the chemistry of the brain, understanding genetics, understanding generational trauma, all of those kind of things happen to everybody. It's that, like I said, it's that equalizer. Oh boy, I'm gonna be embarrassed now, but wasn't there a Kennedy daughter who was in a home, and
She had a lobotomy.
yeah, and things like that, but nobody talked about it. Come on, man, that she was still a Kennedy, and again, I feel like the awareness is the most crucial point. So I will go on live Facebook right here and say that I do have a son with autism, and we have had to, and a couple other things too, but we have had to rely on medication for him, and it isn't really a matter of judgment. It's really truly a matter of keeping him alive. It really is. He does better when he's medicated. When he's not, and he's not a zombie or anything, he's just more authentic. So I feel like there needs to be a bit of a balance there. And at the same time, many mental health professionals that I know right now are talking a lot about psilocybin, about plant medicine, and how effective it is. So I think we can't have that conversation until we start having everyone's got a mental health issue conversation, you know?
Yep.
Well,
And that's
around
one
the,
thing.
please go ahead, Cynthia.
No, that's a huge passion of mine, Jesse, is to be able to talk about psychedelics and science within science of mind. And the fact that our center, or our retreat center, is in Portland, I think Spirit did that for a reason, because if we could have psilocybin retreats in Oregon at that retreat center, it would just, it'd be wonderful.
There may be people listening tonight who could make that happen.
It'd be great.
So, we'll definitely start that conversation. It's around, Ram Dass comes to mind as somebody who was a bridge from the psychedelic world, if you will, and also highly credentialed as a mental health. I don't know if he was a psychologist or professor of psychology or psychiatry or something, but he was at Harvard with Tim Leary, and then came to the recognition of the powers of the mind, and kind of weaned himself off of it. Of course, that wasn't psilocybin he was doing either. That was heavy duty. That was street quality LSD.
Old school.
That yeah, old school. And I mean, that stuff will mess you up. But he was part of that. Okay, I see Reverend Lisa has rejoined the conversation. Have we comments?
I hadn't intended to show my face, but because we do have a question, and I will get to the question in just a minute. But the reason why I wanted to show my face is because I agree with KT about the balance of medication, because I spent 2 years on a prescription antidepressant, and I honestly believe that I would not be here if I had not taken the prescription for 2 years.
Absolutely.
Now, that being said, I went back to the plant based to manage it from there on. But so yeah, I'm balanced. But you do, since this is it was supposed to be your 10-minute warning, but now it's your 5-minute warning. The question that I do have from the Facebook is they want to know about this class or the discussion groups. Is there a program? Is it going to be open discussion? What's going on there? And then I'm going to duck back over and make sure that there wasn't another one. So that's your question.
I have paperwork in front of me, but do you want to respond to this?
Well,
I think
You
one
yes,
of
too,
the things
Lisa.
that was important to, I mean, we do have a whole structure, and Cynthia just is amazing. But I like the fact that we also have a poll. We want to know what people want to talk about. There's no sense in spending energy and talent on discussing something that isn't on people's hearts. So
yeah, and I think a lot of it
Facebook,
too is to help people within the group find out what their passion is and help them uh, write their own template to get involved. And so coming away from the discussion group with kind of like an action plan and to have an accountability group too, support network
Mhm.
as one ventures out into whatever breaks their heart.
When I took the S training a million years ago, at the end of that, you were to take the intention that you had developed and the self-awareness that you gained and whether or not you got it, quote unquote, and channel that into some kind of constructive action in the world, which for the most part looked like something called the Hunger Project, which was
I
the
remember that.
kind of crowning achievement of Werner Erhard. But there was always the option to quote unquote create your own form of service. And many did that. And they started with, if they had money, they could find money, they pulled it together and created little foundations and initiatives and things like that. And many continue to this day. As repurposing old eyeglasses for people in distress, things like that, or the Shirley Sandlin project with the grocery sacks. There's so many different things that one can do. So let me just say, from the linear standpoint, Cynthia has created an 8-week syllabus that is not mandatory and will not necessarily be followed in the same order or complexity that the syllabus is printed in, and it will depend, I know, on that poll, and I know that these two know that just because people fill out the poll doesn't mean they're going to show up in the group. So you get a whole different bunch of people show up in the group, and it goes where it goes. But I know that there is ample material here to keep everybody interested, and we're going to make this document available everywhere we possibly can. So that means it will be on our Facebook page. Okay. It will be on Cynthia's Facebook page and Katie's Facebook page, as well as the center, and as many of our ministers and practitioners as we can get to put it up. It will be in our weekly emails. It will be all over the place. We have a few details to work out about the group, but just know that it is open to everyone. And it starts on August the 8th, which is a Thursday night at 7 o'clock Central Time, 7 o'clock in the evening. Okay. And more than that will come to you as as we as we do that. Okay.
Yeah.
There was one last comment um, from Connie, and it was a reminder that she thinks that one of the failures with the medications was not good follow-up and good therapy.
Yes.
So, and how important therapy is.
Right. You can't just
Aftercare is always a problem. Yeah. Aftercare is always an issue with anything.
Yeah.
They
And
turn you out. Some of that's insurance based, I think, too.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure that's the same thing in plant medicine. You know, if somebody were exploring just for the sake of exploring without follow-up or help, you know.
yeah, integration is key, but I think it's back to the capitalism. Like I think healthcare tied to a vocation or a job is backwards, and the I just think of the Brits, the Canadians, where healthcare is for everyone is beautiful.
Yeah.
So much does go to capitalism.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but capitalism, it's a lot. Capitalism's a lot to unpack for sure.
Yeah, you know what else is a lot to unpack? Organized religion. Oh my
Oh,
God. And
Yes,
the
it's
don't
intersection
get
of
him started.
the intersection of organized religion and capitalism is a sight to behold.
well, you're talking about therapy. The next DSM, which is used to categorize people so therapists can get paid by insurance, will have religious trauma. I think it'll be the
Yeah.
DSM-8.
Yeah, I
It'll
heard that.
be
Yeah.
a diagnosable disorder.
In some cases, yes, I've seen that with people.
Yeah,
So
and yet here we are.
here we are.
And we disavow, we say, oh, this isn't a religion. We just say this isn't a religion, so like we can kind of cleanse ourselves of all of that stuff. And yet it walks like a religion and it talks like a religion, and it principally meets at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning in a room full of chairs. So what are you going to do? Holmes said, well, we can create it a way it's never been. And I thank the two of you
That's what we're
for
doing.
your labor in those minds. Yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, is creating it like it's never been before, where everybody belongs. Great big table. Yeah. Thank you both so much for this evening, and
Oh,
for the group to come. And we will meet again in this format and in other formats. Uh, and again, to those of you who are watching, thank you for spending this time with us. And the information on this group will roll out in precise detail shortly. So,
Thank
and so
you.
we conclude. All right, our next soul
Right.
session is not yet scheduled. We've got several different people we're talking to. It'll come out, I think, in September, middle of the month, and it will be exciting as well. So thank you so much,
Great.
Cynthia. Thank you so much, Katie, and the team behind the scenes who put this on.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.